Hi, well, welcome everyone. Friday again. Our Leadership Live series continues this week, and as usual, I have wonderful guests that just agree to come on to the show. I'm Eva Wong, founder and I guess CEO, whatever it is, of www.elevate.strategy.com. And as you know, this series is intended for listening to personal journeys of successful people who have gone through ups and downs. And one of the reasons behind starting the series was the fact that a lot of my clients, my executive coaching clients, were also going through some tumultuous times and kind of require that kind of encouragement and to hear people's stories. So if you're watching live or if it's after broadcast, please feel free to drop a comment in there. Let us know where you're from. And again, if you're after broadcast, make sure you try to reach out to Eva, my guest today, and whom I'll introduce in a second. She might take a little bit of delay in responding, but I know she's a very kind lady, and she will do her best because I know that it's been hard getting her on the show. So she's been kind to me. So just a very quick thing about Elevate. So an update from my perspective, very quickly, is I've been partnering with a large global kind of recruiting organization called BlueSteps.com. And so this past week, they've sort of assigned me now to be a director of the executive career services, which is great. It's really exciting. Elevate.Strategy still exists, and that's still my business. But in this particular capacity, I have a lot more reach as far as clients go. So hopefully I'll get to meet you in person. So without further ado, let me just introduce my guest. And many of you probably will know Eva Wong because she's just been everywhere. She's been in the news, she's been in interviews, and her story is quite remarkable. Eva and I kind of go back a little bit, and we established a friendship first before she was successful in what she's doing now with Borrowell. So Eva Wong is co-founder and COO of Borrowell. And Borrowell is a financial technology company dedicated to making financial stability possible for everyone. Borwell offers free credit scores, report monitoring, and AI-driven financial product recommendations. And the wonderful thing, success story, is that they've got more than 1 million members now. And this was even probably about 6 months ago that I saw this. So their membership probably has gone up. But because of that, Borwell is probably one of the largest consumer fintech companies in Canada. Borwell has won numerous awards, including being named one of the top 100 fintech companies in the world by KPMG. And they ranked fourth on Deloitte Technology Fast 50th list of fastest growing companies in Canada, and making the App Annie's list of breakout finance apps for 2019. So very excited by her achievements. Eva herself is an entrepreneur, awarded EY Entrepreneur of the Year. She's a winner in Ontario and a frequent speaker in the tech and business communities. She holds degrees from Harvard University and Queen's University, where she serves on the advisory board. So without further ado, I'm going to bring her front stage, and I'll let her talk more about herself. Eva, welcome.
Thanks so much, Simeon. Thanks for the kind welcome. Great to be here.
Yeah. And I was just saying that you and I go back a little bit, and the last time we spoke, we were at a different company working together, and haven't seen you since then. But you've had so much success, and I'm so proud of you because all of us go through our journeys, and some people find their groove, and some people are still working on that, right? And for all the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, which I've talked to a lot of people who are in that boat, people don't see that side of it. But at the end of the day, you're still benefiting a lot of people in the work that you do. So for those of you who don't know, maybe just kind of tell us a little bit about the nature of your profession right now. What do you do? And we'll go into the journey after that.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders and chief operating officer at Borrowell. We're a consumer fintech company. So for those who maybe aren't familiar with fintech, it's a tech company that specializes in financial services. We have offices in Toronto, Kelowna, and Montreal, with people working across the country. As you mentioned, our members, we're actually close to 2 million members. So people who've signed up to use Borwell to monitor and track their credit. Borwell, we're a consumer fintech company. So for those who maybe aren't familiar with fintech, I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Was that?
Yeah, sorry, I just turned that off.
Okay, awesome. And yeah, in terms of my role, I'll just maybe share a little bit about that, because I do think that COO is one of those roles that probably means something different in every different company. Today, I oversee our data and engineering teams, and I play a role in sort of overall strategy and strategy execution across the company as well.
Gotcha. And as of now, how large is your team at Borrowell?
Yeah, so we're about 130 employees.
Okay. Okay. That's incredible. Do you remember the very first employee that you hired, and what was that like?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first employee that we hired on contract and for 3 months, and then turned that into a full-time contract once we raised our first round of funding. So yeah, totally remember that. And I think even thinking about growing the team to 7 or 10 seemed really big. So it's funny now, 7 years later, that the team's over 100 people, which is really exciting.
Right. And so going a little bit into your journey to where you are today, maybe you can share with us, whatever it is that you'd like to share, going as far back as you'd like to go, with keeping in mind that people watching are still going through that journey, as you are, I'm sure, as well. And some people have kind of caught their groove. Some people are still kind of working through that. Maybe you can kind of chat a little bit about what milestones you've had that kind of impacted your career to today.
Yeah. So I would say that my career journey has really been all over the place. If you look at my profile on LinkedIn, and hopefully that's encouraging. I do think that every major change that I've made was always something where it's like, oh my goodness, I wouldn't have thought that I would have done this job.
Right.
And I wouldn't really have it any other way. So hopefully that's encouraging for people who are thinking about doing something that, maybe isn't typical, isn't the normal journey for someone that's in your role today. So I'll start, maybe Simeon, you and I know it's like, once you have a 20-year long career, it can be hard to like tell this in a succinct way. But
I know. And you're gonna warm up. I think the way to think about it is probably some milestones that have come along the way.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe what you started, because I know you started off doing more sort of social. I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I actually started my career in consulting. So I did a Bachelor of Commerce at Queen's, and then moved into consulting, which I think was a great place to start a career. Partly because I didn't want to have to pick either accounting or marketing or finance. I was sort of more interested in staying broad at that point, which again, I think is really appropriate earlier in someone's career. And I appreciate that. I feel like I learned so many skills that I still use today about just problem solving and getting up to speed quickly on something. So that's where I started my career. And then I got laid off, actually, which maybe is appropriate again, because I there's lots of career transitions throughout my history. And that was something that was unexpected, felt pretty devastating at the time. I was 24. I had this dream job, and had been traveling, doing really exciting work. Become really good friends with my colleagues, and still am good friends with those people today. So at the time, it just felt like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And again, I think like given the pandemic, I'm sure lots of people are in that same boat. This was post September 11th, again, another big upheaval in the overall economy. And I really took it as a sign to do something different. And so I took a year. I went to Malawi in Africa and worked for a not-for-profit. Really enjoyed my time there, using the business skills that I had gained as a consultant, but applying it in a completely different context. And I had always had an interest in international issues, and decided to go back to grad school after that year. So did that, was in Boston for a couple of years, and then decided I wanted to come back to Toronto, which is, where I'm based today, and worked at Maple Leaf Foods, which is where I met you, Simeon. So you joined their global foods, the international division of Maple Leaf Foods. I was there for, I guess, about 3.5 years.
Right.
Really enjoyed my time there. Learned a ton more about being in a business as opposed to as a manager consultant, sort of coming in from the outside.
Yeah.
So I think really built a bunch of chops just in terms of how a business operates. and then did, consulting internationally again, came back to Toronto, worked for a not-for-profit, actually worked for the church that I attend. This is totally off the beaten path for someone who has a Bachelor of Commerce from Queens and was a management consultant. So not only going to the charitable sector, but working for a church, which, to me, I really care about the mission. I learned so much there. I actually think that so much of not-for-profit work is very applicable in the business world, and I think in startups. And so I think that people who work in the charitable sector, a lot of that work is undervalued, I think, on a resume, unfairly so. And I feel like I learned so much there about being scrappy, motivating people by mission, not necessarily because you could offer the most competitive comp package, working a lot with volunteers, impacting a broad group of people. So I think there's so much that I learned working at a not-for-profit that I apply to being at a tech startup today.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then after that, it was Borrowell. So that's a little bit of the journey. I'm pretty sure I'm one of the few tech founders that moved from being at a church to being in the tech space. But hopefully that's encouraging. Again, if anyone's like thinking about doing something entrepreneurial, I don't think that there is a quote unquote right or necessary background that you have to have.
Right. Let me ask you, what was the toughest? So several transitions there, right? There was the consulting element of things, and there was the more of the public element of working, doing your graduate degree, and then switching over to industry, Maple Leaf Foods, and then moving over to a church organization. I completely agree that variety of your career really probably has built you into having the skills that you need to be an entrepreneur, right? So tell me about how hard was it, or what was it like transitioning, first of all, from consulting to industry?
Yeah, I think it was pretty rough, actually, because there was so much that I didn't know. And so I am very thankful I had a great manager who helped me get up to speed. I was within a part of Maple Leaf Foods, which was a bit more contained. There were, I think, maybe about 100 people at the division I was in. So I think that helped make it a bit more manageable. But yeah, I think for me, each transition I made, I think got successively easier. And I do think that what it helped me do is build that skill of being comfortable, being uncomfortable, being okay with not knowing a lot of things, and then figuring out how to get out of that into a place where I could be clear about what I was supposed to achieve and actually successful in achieving those goals.
Right. So would you say that the mission of a consulting firm versus on the other side of the fence for industry are they competing usually? Or because a lot of my clients ask about that, right? They've had a lot of skill, maybe within the industry, doing something very specific, and now they're thinking about, well, consulting is an interesting thing that I always love to solve problems and all this kind of a thing. Is it a really abrupt kind of a change in mindset when you switch from industry or consulting to each other?
I think for me, because I hadn't had as much exposure to being within, in industry, in a company, I think that was a bit more of the adjustment for me. I think having done both, and for someone who's done both, I do think the skills are broadly applicable. And maybe if I'd been in consulting longer, I would have had an easier time transitioning because I would have been exposed to more companies. I think I was still relatively junior in my career at the time. So I think that was part of it as well.
And what was the hardest part of being laid off?
I think it's because, in my mind, I had this life carved out for myself, and this was not part of the plan. And as a planner, I think just dealing with that disruption was pretty ground shaking. And, not knowing what I was going to do next, I hadn't expected it. Maybe I should have, but, I think I was caught up in the third round of layoffs that the company had done. But yeah, I think it's just more, that wasn't my plan, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do next.
Right. And coming out of that, then did you have, so I've been laid off probably about twice, right? Not probably, I know how many times I've been laid off. But one of the things that really strikes me is confidence, right? Just not knowing, not knowing what it is I'm actually good at, because it
Right.
doesn't seem like I've been validated because I'm laid off.
Right.
Was that an issue for you too, to find your put your feet underneath yourself and kind of get back on track?
Yeah, yeah. It was for sure, because I think you sort of look around and it's like, well, why was it me and this person as opposed to like the other people who are still there? Um, I think it was helpful that it was quite a broad swath of the company. And again, it
Hmm.
wasn't the first round of layoffs, and so I think that was helpful. But yeah, I think there's definitely a part of it that's like, yeah, why me as opposed to somebody else?
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. My experience. So the dry spell for me was I was at a large retail company that went bankrupt, and it wasn't because of me. But after that, as part of the rounds of layoff, for about 9 months, I didn't have a job, and I
Mhm.
was looking and not really knowing kind of what criteria do I have to offer anyone. And one of the things that I really try to focus on with my clients is for them to find their value, right? What is their unique value proposition to
Mhm.
that particular organization or that particular field?
Mhm.
Unless you understand that, you'll never be able to feel comfortable even speaking about yourself, right? The confidence that comes from knowing and introspection, that period of time is very important. And I think, for anyone listening who is in transition right now, to make use of that time to kind of really think through kind of what are you good at, what do you love to do, and what kind of impact do you want to have going forward?
Yeah.
It's invaluable, right?
For sure. And I went through that after grad school, where I moved back to Toronto and I had been interviewing, but hadn't, landed anything. And yeah, for sure. I think it's like, okay, I have a graduate degree from Harvard, and I spent some time working and doing some volunteer work for Habitat for Humanity. So I would just like put on grubby clothes, go to a like construction job site. And that's like not exactly what I had in mind, with a newly minted graduate degree of what I would be doing.
That's
But
fascinating.
I think,
Okay.
yeah, I think there are a couple things. First of all, I was like, look, how old was I at the time? 28 or something. And I was like, I'm not going to be unemployed for the rest of my life. So just like enjoy this time and do what I'm going to do. I'm going to find a job. So I think that was one thing. And then the second thing, in terms of finding that, unique value proposition, I think what can be often helpful in that process is asking other people, and just to be like, hey, it would be super helpful for me as I'm thinking about what I do next. Can you tell me, what do you think I'm good at? Because I
Mhm,
find it
mhm.
very hard for myself to just like sit there and come up with things. Do you know what I mean? Maybe that's one of my weaknesses, but I found it very helpful and interesting to be like, it maybe feels a little bit self-serving to do it, but I do think it's very useful and people want to be helpful.
Mhm.
Um, is to ask other people, like, what do you think I'm good at? And I was surprised sometimes to hear the answers or see some of the patterns come out of that.
Right. Well, I remember the conversations we had way back when. And one of the things that has always impressed me about yourself is that there's that degree of, even though you're uncertain, there's that confidence about you that to know that, one day this will happen. It's just a matter of what it is. And I can tell you that people all around you that I worked with had a lot of confidence in you. And I remember meeting one particular manager or VP who had worked with you as a consultant later on, and we were trying to work with Maple Leaf Foods, and we went into a meeting and we saw him, and he's like, "Okay, you worked for us a little bit." I said, "Yeah. Have you seen Eva recently?" And I said, "No, I haven't, but I guess her reputation precedes her." So yeah, I need to I need to let you know that, because those are kinds of conversations that people need to hear more of, is the affirming conversations around, not just what they're good at, but the kind of person they are. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
cool.
I'm sorry, I think. Okay, so then from that then to over to church and to kind of the charity element of things. You said that it was very different in motivating people, and I completely understand that, because by and large, a lot of these organizations, they're volunteers, and to incent volunteers to do something can be very difficult and challenging. Can you tell me about that transition and what that was like?
Yeah, I think it was a great opportunity and I was aware going in, I think, what the perception was going to be of me. And I think people were nervous about that. Like, am I going to be too task driven? And will I understand the relational nature of that work? And so, um, I think it was a great opportunity for me just to understand and build more of those soft skills. And, how do you work with huge swaths of volunteers? And I feel very thankful that I worked with people who were just so good at this. And,
Mm,
were like very affirming of both the staff and the volunteers. I think like really emphasizing how important the mission was, all these things that are really important as a leader. Uh, I really credit to my time there of, building those strong relationships and how important that is uh, for the success of your organization. If people don't know that you care about them, I
yeah,
think if you're not emphasizing the importance of the work that they're doing and how it ties back into, the mission of the organization, all that stuff is super useful today. And I really credit to that time.
right. And then to the point of um, integrating the mission and vision of that organization with the work that you were doing. Well, what was that like, right? Because when you're in industry, we're told that the company has a culture. The CEO comes up and sort of gives us, what the 5-10 year plan is, and then you have to integrate that into your daily work, right? And
Yeah.
so, as a a non-charitable organization, not for profit, in the church, their mission is very different, right? And that sort of has to impact the way that you roll with things and kind of the things that you learn. Tell me a little bit about how you worked that through to kind of integrate mission with your own personal working experience, skills that you
Yeah.
developed,
Yeah.
relationships.
I actually don't know that it's that different. I think for sure one of the things that may be harder is like, how do you know when you've achieved your mission? Like setting those goals again in business, the hard numbers are pretty clear in terms of maybe a revenue target and things like that. Which in the area that I worked in the church, like it wasn't about that. So it may be harder to define what good looks like and what the goals are. I think
Mm,
that's a change, but I actually think a lot of the processes that are very similar is like, how do you take that mission and vision? How do you translate that for people into, what it is that they should be focused on? How do we set goals for the quarter? How do we achieve those goals? How do we track against them? I do think that there are a lot of similarities in terms of how organizations work that are very transferable.
right. Yeah. But one of the things that folks that I speak to have a hard time doing is upward managing, and
Mm,
uh, kind of managing the expectations of folks that are overseeing them, or maybe even the board of directors or things like that, and really being able to kind of work with people who are more senior to that, right, to get the vision going. And many people have sort of been laid off because of that lack of
mhm,
skill to be able to manage upwards.
hmm.
What was that like? Was that also similar as well in industry versus the church setting?
I'm trying to think. I feel very fortunate to have had great managers. And I do think that upward management is probably a skill that's drilled into you as a management consultant. So I'm
Right.
very thankful for that as well. Maybe, people early in their career don't think about that or aren't trained in it. But I do think as a consultant, because you're client facing and because you're working with, all these A-type peers,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that was really drilled in. Like one of the things we were sort of shared, it's like, it's great for you to do what's asked of you and present this piece of analysis. If you want to be really great, you think about what's going to be asked of you next, and you also have that done. Do you know what I mean? I think we were sort of trained to be like, your job is to make your manager's job as easy as possible,
Right.
which,
Right.
maybe it's a lot to put on a 23-year-old, but I do think it was helpful and I think I've applied a lot of those principles with my managers going forward, which is like, what is it that they need? How can I make their job easy? Even when I was in Malawi, I mean, the person who was managing me didn't live in the same place as I did. He didn't ask for, updates, but I proactively just put together a weekly email, which was, here are the things that I did last week. These are the things I'm planning on doing next week. Here's where I need your input. Um,
Hmm.
and I think he really appreciated that, right? It was like super easy. In 15 minutes, he knew what I was up to. He knew where I needed his help and guidance. I remember at the church, I worked with someone who was super busy. It was very hard to get his like time and attention. And I would write these emails to be like, okay, this is the problem. Here are the pros and cons. Like, this is what I'm proposing. Do you agree? Like, Y or N? Or it's like, these are the three options, 1, 2, and 3. Just respond back. So I tried to make it like super easy where it's like he could read it all, even if he was in a meeting, and just like respond back with like a single, character.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, okay, great. You mean, I think that stuff is sort of
Yes.
into
Yeah.
you a bit. That being said, maybe like one of the things that we do at Borrowell, which I think has been super helpful, is that as managers, we've all written user guides about ourselves, which is like, how do I like to work? What's the best way to get in touch with me? What like erodes trust for me? And we share that pretty broadly
Wow.
across
Okay.
our teams. And I think like an exercise like that could be helpful in and maybe it's like awkward for you to ask your manager to write something like this, but I think even having that conversation around like, hey, how do you like to be updated? What
Right.
is, what's your preferred style of communication? Like what can I do? And I think is asking for frequent feedback. And I appreciate that of the team I have. People will be like, hey, I really want feedback. Tell me what I could be doing better. Tell me, am I meeting your expectations? What can I do? To make sure that you're clear on what I'm working on and that I'm achieving the goals that I should be working on.
Mm-hmm. And for all the people who are watching again after broadcaster now who are people managers, hashtag or type in, how is it that you motivate your employees and how is it that you manage that environment so that people are successful in a lot of times, Eva, it's just communication, right? It's just getting an idea or point across quickly and making it, like you said, for example, making it easy for your manager to do their work better. And
Yeah.
I would also add to not have them be surprised by anything, right? That's
Right.
the worst thing happen, right? Is that you
Yes.
have a boss who's completely blindsided and you should have seen this coming.
Yeah.
That's
For sure. For sure. I mean, I think in any relationship, right? It's like about managing expectations. I sort of tell the story of, I remember when I was on parental leave and I was home, with the baby all day. And like if my husband told me that he was going to be home at 5:00 and he didn't show up till 6, it was like, I'm counting like every minute because I've got this like, crying baby that I'm looking to hand off. If he tells me he is going to be home at 7 and he's home at 6, I'm thrilled. So it's not like it's not what happens. It's my expectation of what's going to happen that really changes my mentality, right? Like in both situations, he's coming home at 6:00. In one situation, I'm furious. In the other one, I'm thrilled. It's just like what he told me and what my expectation is. And I think that's very true of all relationships.
Well, and I'm sure the management consulting you is sort of like, after every project we're graded for that, like a kind of a post-mortem, right? So you've either met expectations, exceeded, or you haven't, right? So you're grading your husband is that you've met your expectations. Great. We get to have dinner together tonight, and guess what? The consolation for all the great prize is that you get to take care of your child while and do something, right? So you mentioned something very, very important, and that's a hot topic for today, which is being a parent and how that has impacted or in some cases, for some people have been hindering their career. And it's not just for the mothers, but also for the fathers who have taken paternal leave. Tell me a little bit about that. How did you kind of ease yourself into being a mother, but then also thinking about your ambition and goals going ahead?
Yeah. So there's a great book that I read called The Mom Shift by Reva Seth. She's a Canadian woman and an author. And the book talked about, it was specifically about women becoming mothers, but people who became more ambitious in their career aspirations after having a child. And for some, I think it was more like, oh, I'm an adult, I need to step this up. And I think for others, it was, look, if I'm going to be spending time away from my kids, I want what I do to matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was like a really great way of thinking about it, because I think so often the narrative is, oh, if you're a parent, that means you're supposed to step back from your career.
Right.
And I really appreciate this to be like, no, like you should be more ambitious because the sort of opportunity cost of your time is higher in some ways, right? And so I don't think that means necessarily like more hours. And for sure, I think balance is a hot topic. So when we started Borrowell, I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. I'm very thankful that the rest of the founding team also had kids, and we were pretty intentional about taking some time off, which I think was healthy for us, healthy for the business. I think I'm very thankful because it's very easy as an entrepreneur, as you know, just to spend 24/7 thinking about the business, working on the business, which I think is ultimately unhealthy. I think it means you don't get outside perspective. It means too much of your self-worth, I think, becomes part of the business.
Right.
And I think in some ways, I love my children. So when I refer to them as a forcing mechanism, it's like in a very positive way. But, I wanted to spend time with my family. And so it was, every night between 5 and 8, more or less, was, time where I could unplug, do something different, focus on something different. And I think that was like super healthy. So obviously, we had that culture. We have that culture today. I think we try to be very clear that you can build a great career here and you can have a family that you spend time with. And I think that's become a real advantage. People want to do exciting, meaningful work, but they want to have a life outside of work as well, whether they have a family or not.
Right. So that lends itself to the third part of, maybe third or fourth in your mind, but the clear delineation between moving from a church environment to becoming an entrepreneur, right? So now you've got a major shift in kind of your mentality, your mindset, maybe going back into your corporate, business world sort of a thing. Can you tell me about that transition and sort of some challenges that you faced, and what was that like?
Yeah. So in between transitioning from church to being an entrepreneur, I actually had a year of parental leave.
Okay.
So for me, it was more transitioning. I'll think about that question as well. But I do think that it was a transition for me to go back to work. In many ways, it was very positive because, I sort of joked, when I'm at work, no one follows me to the bathroom. I can just eat my own lunch and not have to feed anyone else. So in some ways, it was like very freeing and liberating. And I have joked that we should hire more people who have been on leave, because just like the expectations are so low around, I think around sort of like fulfillment. It was just like great to be around adults and have these, adult, intellectually interesting conversations after being at home with 2 kids for a year.
Right.
So I would say that transition was very positive. I think the transition to entrepreneur, it was more a transition to entrepreneurship from being at a bigger organization. And when you're a founder, again, as you know, if you don't do it yourself, like nothing gets done. I think it was more that. I think the other thing that happened is you care as much as I cared wherever I'd worked before as a founder. This is like your baby, right? So I think it's you care a lot about it, and I think it's like it makes it harder to let go. Which I think that's why so many entrepreneurs, I think, have work-life balance issues, especially in the beginning. It's it doesn't get done if you don't do it yourself. So it's only on you. And I think because you care about it so much, you end up, those lines between work and life, I think, can become pretty blurred.
And again, anyone watching who have experience with that transition into parenthood and mixing that and trying to balance that with career, feel free to share your thoughts. I was just thinking that, it's true that you don't have anybody falling to the washroom, but you've got a whole organization now that's falling to the washroom, right? So it's different kind of stress. Okay, so transition into there was that. Tell me about throughout your career, some strengths and weaknesses that you have, in particular ones that you never knew that you did, right? So you never really expect, because you talked a little bit earlier about asking people about feedback on, what strengths you have, but then also weaknesses of areas of struggle that you never thought that were there, but apparently became clear as you went down the path.
Happy to chat about that. So I think I've touched on it a bit before earlier in our conversation around, I think one of the things that people have told me is a strength is the ability to sort of take something that is unknown or uncertain or unclear and, come up with a plan, execute against that plan. I think it's problem solving, I guess, if you need to put a word towards it. But I would say that was true of starting Borrowell is, it's not really clear what the first steps are. Like, what is it that you need to do? What are the most important things to do? And I do think that because I changed careers and changed industries so often, I was
Mm-hmm.
always in a place where I knew nothing. And so I became like quite comfortable having to sort of figure things out, put together a plan,
Right.
get buy-in to the point that we had around like managing expectations and managing up, to be like, hey, I've been in this role for however long. This is what I think I should be spending the next like month doing, the next 3 months doing. Does this make sense to you? Let's,
Mm-hmm.
getting that buy-in. So yeah, I think that like love of learning, which is one of our values here at Borrowell, and just like figuring something out, taking something that is, again, it's like, okay, well, we need a strategy here. We need like a plan here. Right now, it's a bit of a mess. It's like a lot that people aren't even sure like what the right question is to ask. I think that's like a strength of mine.
Right. Had you always known that you were like that since you started working?
No, I don't think so. I think it was like super interesting for me to hear people say that, because I remember one particular conversation with a colleague of mine, and he's like, it was sort of up for debate as to like who was going to take this on, and this like particular project on. He's like, "Oh, Eva, you should do it." He's like, "It's in your wheelhouse or something like that." It was not in my wheelhouse. I was like, "It's not really in my wheelhouse," and he's like, "Yeah, but you're like, this is what you do. You do things that are outside your wheelhouse." Do you know what I mean? I think it was more just like the recognition that like, yeah, but you always do things that you don't know how to do, and he was a little bit more. It's like, this is what I do, and I do it well.
Yeah.
And my sort of like strength is like taking things that I don't know how to do and figuring it out.
Yeah. And that's a very helpful life skill to have, right? Because all of life is often kind of twists and turns that you never expect, and trying to figure that out and navigate through that is something that I think can be learned, but also in some cases it's also something that you're kind of born innately with. And many people who are not like that will need to find a profession where it doesn't require that kind of uncertainty. In some sense, being an entrepreneur every single day, right? So what about weakness, Eva? Tell me something that you didn't expect what happened there?
So I also think that strengths can become weaknesses. And I would say that the same way that I would say problem solving is a strength, I would also say that like problem solving and wanting to solve the problem has become a weakness, especially as I've become more senior and as the organization has grown. Is like me jumping in to solve the problem is often not what the organization needs. And I think that was important learning for me, because it's like, okay, there's a problem here. And it'd be like, okay, I'm going to go in and fix it.
Right.
And that actually can be very disempowering for the team. So I think I needed to recognize when it's helpful for me to go in and solve a problem, and when it's actually not helpful for me to go in and solve the problem. And I think recognizing again that like, even though I may have the most historical knowledge, or, I may think that I can drive to a better solution, if that's not my area, that's actually like not helpful. It would be better for me to step back and empower the team to do it themselves and support however I can. I think even now, like sometimes I think I'm supporting and people are like, no, you're like getting way too involved. So I think, we've got a great team, and I think it's been, I think it's that transition. In the early days, I had to do everything, and then you sort of move to, other people are doing things with your support. And then it's like, people are doing things and they do not want you to be involved. So I think that's been learning for me.
And I'm sure they make it known to you very clearly, right? In some point or another, it's like, Eva, just maybe move next door to the room. And
well, do you know what? I think that like, it can be hard for people to give that upward feedback. I mean, as you've sort of shared before.
Sure.
And I think it's really important as a people manager and as a leader to make that easy for people. And I think that is one of the things I've learned, is to check in to say, hey, how can I be helpful here? Am I overstepping? Am I getting too involved? Like, make it very easy, because I think it is a hard conversation for someone to come to the founder of an organization and say, hey, I don't want your help, or, I can handle this on my own.
Right.
So I think that is another thing I've learned, which is just to ask, to be, it's like, am I involved enough? Am I too involved? Because it's going to be different for every person, for every initiative.
Right.
And I think, I've received feedback that like, sometimes I'm like too involved and sometimes I'm not involved enough. And so, I think it's like figuring that out. And the best way to figure that out, I think, is to have an open conversation about it.
Right. What's the most humbling experience you've had since you started Borrowell?
There's been a lot. I mean, I'm trying to think through. We've like launched things that haven't worked. I think that's very humbling when you put like a lot of time and effort into launching a product or a feature that you think is going to be amazing, and it doesn't take off right away. That's been humbling. Um, that's like the top thing that comes to mind. I think anytime you get feedback, like I've just shared, is also humbling and forces a lot of reflection. And I think the thing that makes it easier to take is like understanding the learning that comes out of it, right? Where this is not an attack on my self-worth or who I am. This is an opportunity to learn and take something away and grow as a person.
Yeah, right, for sure. And every day can be a humbling experience if you're putting your mindset into that space of learning, right? You talked about earlier that love of learning, and when you don't know something, sometimes that you feel relatively powerless. One of the things that I try to coach my clients to do is use this time to learn, and not just the hard skills, but maybe develop this sort of a sense of relational aspect of things. So really sit down and evaluate, maybe some of the relationships in their past role that maybe didn't go as well as it should have, and what they can sort of self-actualize and improve, right? So, gotcha. Okay. Let me shift gears very quickly to talking about milestones. So, who was the most influential person in your life that you can think of in the area of career? Gave you that first advice, kind of sparked something in you, started you off on your journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a manager that I had where I worked at the church, and I think he was just always like a great cheerleader and, very insightful in terms of people and their strengths and abilities. And so I think I would probably point to him and, like the opportunities that he gave me. And I think I was much more, especially earlier in my career, like much more of a behind the scenes, like project manager kind of person.
Right.
And through a couple of people at the church, I think they really encouraged me to like speak more and, do a bit more of the like public speaking, and which I do like a ton of now, or a lot more of now. But that was never something that I sort of felt was in me. And I think that's one of the great things about great managers is they sort of, help you to see what you could do or you could become that maybe you don't see in yourself quite yet.
Right. And is that what you adopt now as the founder and the manager, to empower people, is to kind of push them and look for what their skills are that they may not recognize? Is that sort of baked into that?
I should be doing that. I mean, now that you're saying it to me, and I feel like, yes, I'm going to reflect and make sure this is something that I'm doing. I do a bit. We're actually in the process of doing performance reviews, and I actually think that's a lot. It's like almost giving people permission to do what they can do, right? And I think that empowering is something that's really important, and something I can do more of for sure as a manager. But I do think a lot of the feedback, if I reflect on it, is like, you are a leader, just like be confident in your leader. Don't, wait for permission. Everyone's asking for you to be more involved and for you to speak up more. So I do think that it's something that's very normal, is, people making that transition and not being quite sure that, their voice is wanted or heard. And so I think, again, just like encouraging people, it's like people want to hear what you have to say, be proactive in doing that. You're going to add more value to the company.
Gotcha. Okay. So you talked about the manager at the church that you were working at, and how he sort of brought out the best in you. What about other milestones? So when you were younger, and maybe this is a rapid fire question that I'm hinting towards, what had you always wanted to be?
So there were a few things I wanted to be. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be prime minister. And if I look back, I think that I more just like wanted to make the rules. If I think back to teacher, I think, as a student, the teacher is the one who like made up the rules.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure where astronaut came from, but yeah, I remember those being written down early on in terms of things I was interested in.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize the astronaut part. I could see you as a teacher and even prime minister. But another topic for another day about the astronaut thing. But okay, so that's great. So unexpected weaknesses exactly are the strengths that you have today, which is getting too involved with things and sort of having to kind of step back when your team says to you, or even to observe yourself and sort of say, okay, you know what, I need to step back now. In relating now to the public and the expectations that they have on you as a founder. So not now, so from your team, but Borwell is such a large and very important product, right? And company. The stuff that you do around credit is incredible. The number of people that you reach, that pressure that gets onto you. Tell me something about sort of what that's like, and how do you manage through that, the expectations, and sort of manage feedback and all that stuff. What's it like being in your shoes?
That's a great question. I don't know. I appreciate the kind words about the impact that Borrowell's had, and that for sure is like very motivating for us and for the team. I guess I don't necessarily see myself the way that you're portraying, Simeon. I don't feel there's like a ton of public pressure on me. Yeah, I mean, I think there's maybe expectations and maybe expectations around founders. I want to debunk a bunch of those things. And that's like why I do a lot of the speaking that I do. I do want to encourage people who maybe don't have the traditional background or come from a group that's underrepresented in tech, which is, overrepresented by straight white men. So if you're not a straight white man, then again, I really want to encourage people who have those non-traditional backgrounds.
Right.
To think about what they want to do and not hold themselves back because they don't see themselves, as in the mainstream media, maybe as much as they should. But that's more, I think, maybe if I feel any pressure, it's that pressure to sort of get that message out there around. I think it will be much better for us as a society if we have people starting companies who, are more representative of who we are as a population.
Right. Well, I can tell you that, it's extremely motivating to see all when you're exposed. You're representing so many different roles that are underrepresented, right? So obviously you're Asian descent, you're a woman, you're also in fintech, which is finance and technology, which has typically been dominated by a certain type of persona, right? And so that's inspiring because people have a hard time understanding what fintech is to begin with. And to hear someone up there who's not the persona that you were saying express and explain what that is, it's extremely motivating, right? So that's kind of what I would imagine, is that there's an expectation now for you to represent more, and I wonder whether that's the case, right? So I think one of the challenges is probably living up to that expectation. But Eva, I mean, I think the reality is that as being in front and center as you are, you may not be aware of that, but you have a lot of impact on people personally and their personal stories. And so that, on that note, I wanted to know a little bit about what encourages you. So you talked earlier about, what discourages you, which is things that you launch that don't work, feedback that's maybe not extremely easy to hear. But on a day-to-day level, what is it that people may not know that really kind of lifts up your spirits, kind of makes things?
Yeah. I think there's two things. For sure, the mission and hearing stories from our members is something that's super motivating to me, but I think motivates like a lot of our team as well, because it can be easy at scale just to be like, okay, you're looking at numbers of, how many tens of thousands of people logged into the, Borrowell app or website today. Like, that's super exciting. But I think for me, it's sometimes hearing those individual stories, which again, we try to do. We'll on a quarterly basis have what we call a member Fireside Chat, where we just invite one of our members to come and talk to us really openly. But it's often great to hear people's stories, and that Borwell's made even a small difference in helping them achieve some of their goals, like being able to buy a car, being able to buy a home. These are really big things that people feel like were impossible maybe a couple of years ago. And to know that Borrowell's played a part in their journey towards financial stability, even like helping them feel better about their finances. I think for so many people, I remember one of our members in the Fireside Chat, she shared that her first memory of her mother was stressing out about being able to pay bills, being at that kitchen table. Like her first memory of her parent was that. So you sort of think about like how that impacts how you think about money. It impacts the relationship you have with your mother, impacts the relationship you'll have with your children. So I think hearing some of those stories and then saying it's like, yeah, but Borwell gave me the confidence that like, hey, I know how to do this. I know how to improve my credit score. I know the importance of, these like personal financial habits. And I'm in a such better place now. I'm the one in my family that people come to ask for advice. And so just sort of like, it's in a way, it's like, it's not just achieving financial goals. It's like a self-actualization in a lot of ways, right? Like they've sort of turned something that was super stressful in their life to now being seen as an expert. I think those stories for me are really encouraging.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. When you become an expert in something, then all of a sudden the good in what you do becomes very apparent. And those who wrestle with some of the things that you're bringing out now, because, again, a lot of my experience working with the clients has been that being laid off or being in transition has really opened up their wallet in sense of, looking at what they're spending money actually on and kind of figuring out when is it enough, right? And so I kind of always joke that when I started at Elevate.Strategy, it felt like I was coming out of university again. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I'd love to do something. I was like 30 years now more advanced in my knowledge and gray hairs. But that idea of, what is it that, I'm looking for role models, right, to kind of help me to guideposts. And I think when you start something like what you've done, it really becomes front and center for being a role model for certain things and, making things possible or dreamable that they never thought was possible before, right?
Yeah. I said two things, so maybe I'll just like quickly touch on the second thing that's really encouraging to me is I think we have such an amazing team here at Borrowell. And when I hear even from oftentimes it will be during an interview where people will just say, hey, I just have to let you know, you've clearly built something amazing here. I've so enjoyed the interview process. I've loved everyone that I've met. The communication's been so clear. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just so great to hear that kind of feedback from someone external. To sort of say, hey, you've clearly built something amazing in terms of the culture because, and then not even from people who are interviewing, but as I sort of talk to people who've just joined the company, hearing them talk about how much they love coming to work is also really encouraging for me.
Right. And so then the flip side of that is how do you manage when you're stressed out? So when things are difficult, you look at the feedback from people who have positive impact, right? You look at people more than just the numbers, and that kind of helps you to remember the mission.
Yeah.
But when you're stressed, like physically stressed, how do you manage that?
Yeah. I think one of the things that has been helpful for me, and I don't know what this says about my personality, maybe misery loves company, but I think just to recognize that everyone goes through really challenging times. It is 100% normal. Being stressed means that I care about it. I think for sure there's like, ways to manage that stress, whether that's, physical activities like helpful for me or, meditation, a bigger perspective around like what's important in the world, all that's helpful. But I do think that just like everything that is hard is going to be a challenge and it's not going to come easily. And there are going to be unexpected things. I think even like looking back to see that like, oh my goodness, like we actually went through something like this before and we got through it. And I think even helping our team recognize that has been helpful. It's like, oh yeah, we did this before. It felt terrible at the time. And then 3 months later, we'd sort of forgotten about it. So, whatever that challenge is, I think even going back and recognizing that if you haven't gone through it, other people do. And I think even that's helpful to be like, this is 100% normal. Every company going through this stage, like goes through this.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's two things that came out of that for me, what you just said now. One is to remain optimistic, right? As soon as you think that, okay, you're in this by yourself, the well is deep and there's just no way out, then you've lost sight of that and it becomes very suffocating for a lot of folks, really suffocating, especially during this time during COVID.
Yeah.
The other thing that I got from that was that you're tenacious, right? That you're going to be proactively managing your expectation and your mindset so that you can empower other people, right? So no matter what it is that you're tenacity is to kind of, they call it grit, right? There's that book called Grit now. And constantly kind of having that balance, being optimistic and driving that tenacity.
Yeah.
While not probably overreaching, right? Being careful of that.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a great synthesis, Simeon, of my drivel. So it's great.
No. It's the management consulting thing that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Everything has to be in frameworks. And so, and so when you're coaching people on your staff, on your team, and they're going through something difficult, right? How do you encourage them to get through that? Now, I think what you were implying earlier on was that maybe you should do more of that. Okay, but having said that, when you have done that, like, how do you work with the team to kind of be that mentor, be that coach for them? Like, what do you say to them? How do you encourage them to get through some of their difficult times?
Yeah. I do think that, like, being a manager is different for like different people and at different stages. I think when people are down, I often encourage people like not to take things too personally. And again, this depends on the situation, but our team is such high ownership, and I think they tend to blame themselves first if anything goes wrong.
Right.
I don't feel like I need to be that person that's like, hey, what's going to what are you going to do differently? People are very self-reflective. They'll run like the right process to figure things out.
Right.
I feel like with much of my team, it is like getting them out of it to be like, we'll figure this out.
Right.
I know that, we'll get the lessons out of this. And
right.
And I think just encouraging that optimism, as you were saying, again, It may be different for like different people in terms of like getting down or like learning from their, mistakes or things that have gone wrong. But I think a lot of times it is like helping people manage their emotions out of it is like a big part of the role.
Yeah. What I've found over the years is when you're giving an interview to someone who is a candidate, is the question about how do you manage your stress? How do you get through difficult situations? Tell me about a time when you had to do that, is such an important part of the question, because inevitably that's what you're going to face, right? And no matter how much you're up to the task for that role, there's going to be failure involved with that. And I need to know as a team member that you're going to be able to get perspective and be able to kind of get back on board, right? So that's absolutely critical. Cool. Okay. One last question, the serious part, and before the rapid fire is, after all is said and done, what's a motto that you live by in your life now? And that's something that, means something to you that you kind of fall back on. Like what is that phrase between the quotations that would be?
Yeah, I do have one. Does everyone have one of these, Simeon?
I know I do. You know what mine is?
I'd love to hear what yours is.
Mine is people before projects.
Cool.
That's mine.
That's great. That's great. Mine is, to those whom much is given, much is expected.
Gotcha.
So I just feel like I've been so fortunate in terms of like opportunities that I've been given, whether that's education, whether that's like experiences. And so I just feel very blessed and fortunate. And I really use that as motivation to, that I have to do something with this. Like I feel like all this privilege is a responsibility as well.
Okay. Gotcha. And I understand the reference. All right, Eva. So we're coming to the top of the hour, but I have a few rapid questions for you.
Okay, go.
All right. So if you watched any of my broadcasts, you'll know the first one. So what is your alter ego profession? If you weren't doing this right now, would it be astronaut? Is that the answer?
No, it's not. I don't even know, where astronaut came from. I've been going through like a home renovation recently. And so this has changed. Right now, I would say kitchen designer. I've like so loved designing the kitchen. So my alter ego profession would be kitchen designer.
I've been following you a little bit on Facebook too, while just seeing your posts, and almost every other post is about baking. And I was like, okay, maybe there's a branch off from Borrowell into culinary, potential and all that. So, okay, great, gotcha. What is one word that you love?
One word that I love. The first thing that came to mind is accountable. I don't know what that says.
Okay. No, that's absolutely completely fair game. That's scary, Eva. That's scary to me. I remember working for bosses where that's all they emphasize on was accountability. You've got to be, but it's ownership, right? You talked about that. That's a theme.
Yeah.
When you hire team members, it's people who are, serious about kind of, living up to the task, but at the same time being too hard on themselves. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I was thinking of it more for like myself than for other people, but yeah. So hopefully it's not scary. I want to be accountable myself. So.
Gotcha. And what's one word that you hate?
Oh, moist.
Okay.
More just for like the sound of it. I think the sound of it is sort of gross.
All right. Okay, I'll take that. That's probably the most surprising and funniest one I've heard. What book or movie title would best describe your career?
Up in the Air.
Okay, gotcha. Which is about an executive who goes around laying off people, but sure.
It was more for the Kendrick character, Anna Kendrick character, who works with George Clooney and who's going around laying people off. But I guess, as my first role was that, felt a bit of infinity.
Gotcha. And last question, maybe you've already answered this. What's one COVID hobby or habit that you developed during the COVID time?
It's a good question as well. Home renovation.
Okay.
Like the COVID hobby, I suppose.
Maybe that's part of the Habitat for Humanity part, right?
Maybe. Well, I'm not doing any of the actual work this time around, thankfully.
All right. Well, Eva, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and I really wish you all the best. It's really proud of you. It's been a journey, I know, and you're doing great things for the community, for Canada, and you're setting an example at the bar. And I know it only gets harder because as you open up new markets, then people see opportunities, and the competition becomes more difficult. But you'll absolutely do fine. I have every confidence in that. So. Eva, we'll catch up again soon. Don't leave anywhere. Sure. I'm just going to put you back on backstage and just close off, and then we'll have a quick chat.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the kind words.
No worries. Wow, that was amazing. I absolutely have utmost respect for Eva. She's extremely humble, as you can tell, but at the same time firm, and I would say quite a reasonable manager. Maybe a little tough on yourself, right? But when you're down and out, and for those who are watching now or later on thinking about your career, oftentimes the result of being too hard on yourself is kind of where you've gotten to. And just want you guys to know that hard on yourself sometimes is a bit of self-fulfilling prophecy. When you don't believe that you can do something and you're too hard on yourself, then you will not be able to do that. And so people will see that, and ultimately things maybe don't work out, right? So on that note, thank you so much for joining me this week again. And thank you, Eva, again for coming on the show. And until next week with an excellent guest, have a good weekend and see you soon.